Red rum.
Can you try that again?
Red rum!
Good job. Thank you.
What's going on, everybody? Well, continuing along my little venture into Stephen King movies leading up to Stephen King's It, the remake coming out, which I'm really excited for. I've been going over, I did Christine, did Pet Sematary, and now I have a review series I'm doing with Sean Chandler from Sean Chandler Talks About. We're talking about The Shining right now, and after you get done with this video, head over to his channel that Sean Chandler Talks About, and we'll be talking about Stephen King's The Mist. So, Sean Chandler, tell us about your channel.
Hey, my name's Sean Chandler. Chandler is my name. My channel is called Sean Chandler Talks About. I talk about movie reviews, I do ranking videos, but I don't want to just talk about movies, I want to talk about movies with you. So if you head on over there, always be sure to leave a comment down below and we can get a nice lively discussion going on over there.
Yes, go over there, hit the subscribe button. The guy's got a lot of really cool videos, and you'll see me on a few of them, Masters of Movie Trivia, stuff like that. So tons of stuff for your viewing pleasure over there. Now, talking about The Shining, Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, not only one of the most celebrated horror movies of all time, what many people would call the best, if not one of the best Stephen King adaptations of all time, and many people would call it Stanley Kubrick's best film of all time, which is actually a pretty tall order considering that guy's filmography. So, basic storyline of The Shining, if you don't know, is you have this family going up into the Colorado Rockies. They are taking care of this Overlook Hotel, which is this monstrous hotel, over the winter just to keep the fans running, keep the boilers running, keep everything going while it is out of commission. And while this family is stuck there, cabin fever sets in, spirits and evil that comes through this hotel starts to kind of seep into their life. Alcoholism plays into part of that, just bad things all around. And it is one of the craziest, scariest, and most simplistic, honestly, horror films that I've ever seen. One of my favorite Stephen King adaptations for sure. Sean, what is your kind of initial impression of this movie?
This is one of those movies that obviously I've always heard the praise for it. I've seen it another number of times, and it's a movie that I can respect more so than I necessarily enjoy. And it's a movie that I keep trying to like it as much as everyone else. And there's things about it that are so great, and there's other things about it where I go, I'm just not clicking with it on the same level that everyone else does. And even rewatching it last night and kind of taking notes and tracking along with it, just having that same vibe of like, I can see where there's all these aspects of it that I totally understand, where everyone is praising it and enamored with it. And then there's a few other things where it seems like they kind of skip over a few of the odd things in it, or I didn't hear them mention them in the number of reviews I've listened to over the last kind of, actually today, trying to like do some research on it, get some thoughts on it, and kind of organize my own thoughts. So that's kind of my initial take on it.
Well, man, I'm glad we're talking about this movie then, because we're going to have a lively discussion. And all those things you're talking about you've never heard brought up, I'm hoping you're going to bring all of them up right now. So I guess we'll start off with the positives. So the main positive of this movie, I think pretty much everybody can agree on. Whether or not you love this movie, hate it, kind of like it, kind of enamored with it, don't really see the appeal with it. Jack Nicholson.
Here's Johnny.
I think this is easily in the argument of his best performance ever. Oftentimes it's the Joker or it's Jack Torrance that people often think about whenever you say Jack Nicholson. So you got Jack Nicholson giving a performance of this guy who's this regular guy. He's a writer. He's going off to take his family into this, Overlook Hotel, not only because he needs a job, but he also wants time and seclusion to write and to, prepare his other career. He's got alcoholism in his past, violence, child abuse in his past, where he accidentally, almost or broke his son's arm when in a rage of alcoholic fit. He's got kind of a strange relationship with his wife, where you feel like they're on like the back burner of this kind of mending relationship, where there was this huge thing that kind of almost split them apart, probably the incident with the son, but they're still kind of loving towards each other, but they're bringing it back together. It feels like they're on the upswing. And throughout the movie, you just see this guy deteriorate. You see both the cabin fever and the spirits and kind of the eeriness of this hotel start to kind of seep into him. You also get the alcoholism that comes back, and you just start to see so many different shades of this guy through Jack Nicholson. You get to see the regular guy, you get to see the funny, personality of Jack Nicholson, especially in the scene whenever he's talking to the bartender, which is a scene that I definitely want to talk about, just that one scene. You get to see the violence and the rage and the scariness of his performance in the third act whenever he is just full on out to murder everybody. Yeah, so that's the main positive for me. What's your thoughts on Jack Nicholson?
Naturally, he's one of those actors that when you think of crazy and just going for it and can pull it off, he's kind of the natural guy that immediately comes to mind. And of course, right here, you see him doing that. And just seeing him go from kind of the fun, kind of charismatic, hey, you know, of course, I'm not going to get cabin fever. I'll be fine up there. I want time to work. And then as it progresses to whether when he first starts to show the signs of going cuckoo, whether he's just standing there like looking out and you're like,
yes.
Whoa, whoa.
Just that
like,
small little facial change.
Right, like, how do you have so much crazy in just doing that just pulled it off? And then whether he starts getting into the angry outbursts and just the terror that comes into it. The scenes where, she first finds out that he hasn't been writing anything and she's just like terrified of him. And it just kind of this tension building as he's just kind of freaking out on her. Just all of that stuff. Of course, just amazing. His ability, just captivating as you're just watching him go at it like that. So of course, yeah, a great performance from him.
Little pigs, let me come in. Not by the hair on your chinny chin chin. Then I'll huff, and I'll puff, and I'll blow your house in.
Absolutely, yeah. A lot of those scenes you're talking about, especially that one, yeah, when he's just looking outside and you just see these small, like 2% change in his face, and it's 1,000% change in his, whether or not he's a psychopath or not. So love all of that. The other biggest positive to me is the hotel itself, the way that it's shot, the hedge maze, the way that the thing is laid out. It's so vast and open to the point that it is claustrophobic. Like it's endless. It feels like you could not find every single square inch of that hotel if you walked around it for a year, and yet it feels so secluded and claustrophobic. You got the scenes like when their little boy is just driving his little tricycle through the hallways, and just the sound of, his tires going from wood floors to carpet just kind of gets under your skin a little bit. Especially the hedge maze, whenever you start looking at the outside surroundings, the snow, which I've said before, like in the Wind River, I believe was the review I was talking about. Snow to me just adds an extra level of creepy. I don't know what it is about it. Just the fact that snow covers everything outside. I don't know if it's just the blank slate that it puts on the outside, or if it's this form of it keeps you inside. Something about snow just adds an extra level of creepy to me. So everything about the Overlook Hotel, the way they shot it, the blood elevator, the hallways, everything like that, to me that's the second biggest positive. Do you feel the same way?
Yeah, well, I guess it kind of combines together, but I'd say that just the full atmosphere of the movie.
Yes.
Like almost as soon as you get there, and it's the hotel, but just the way everything's designed, and you're just kind of creeped out, feeling like, ugh, what's going on? Just as soon as you get there, and just the music underneath it, the atmosphere they're in, the way things are staged, the way people are behaving, all of it, just that atmosphere, which certainly goes hand in hand with the Overlook itself. That's the one that it would immediately come to my mind of just, ugh, like I don't know what's going on or what's about to happen, but it's not good.
Yeah, exactly. The hotel is so sterile and clean and immaculate, but that it feels so grimy and often weird at the same time. It's hard to explain unless you actually experience it and watch the movie. Yeah, I totally get what you're saying. It just ties in with the tone, the atmosphere of everything with the movie. And then I also like the other biggest thing for me too is just things that seem so random and out of place in this movie, which it might be one of your negatives actually, but to me it feels like these random scenes, these random little weird, eerie scenes that they kind of chop in and out, like especially in the third act when they start seeing these strange ghosts, like you see the guy hold up the glass and half his head's kind of bleeding out. You got where she looks into the hotel room and there's a guy on the bed and he sits up and there's a dude in a bear costume, which, you know, a very suggestive scene. But just these little weird, creepy things that seem so out of place in this movie, even the blood elevator to a degree, they add this level of like, what the hell is going on here? And it's, to me, it's like, if I experience one of those things, I don't care how much snow is outside, I'm leaving that hotel. But they're just stuck here, and the more that they're there, they keep seeing these things, they keep hearing these things, and, you know, don't go in room 237, like all these strange things that seem like they have no tie to the general plot of the movie, but they just add so much weirdness and so much of this like sinister tone to the movie.
Yeah. And that's somewhat where I'll be going with the element of stories, where I'll kind of be going on the negative side and statements on it. But yeah,
Gotcha.
I think that's kind of thing as you're watching it. That's sort of the whole time you're watching it, whether the weird imagery, wherever things are going, and then it just makes a creepy turn. Whether there's a pretty lady there naked kissing him, and then it turns into like just creepy, disturbing image. Like,
Yeah, exactly. Get away!
This in. But yeah, you're just going through it, and yeah, that ick creep factor of all, whether the randomness or the intentionality and elements to it, but all of it, just that, like I said, that creepy atmosphere and aura that just goes on throughout the whole thing until the very end.
Yeah, absolutely. And the one scene I wanted to talk about with that too, which is kind of my favorite scene of the movie, honestly, is the bartender scene. It's the point when the alcoholism side of the story really starts to kick in, because, you know, the movie does really good about not really giving you a clear-cut reason why Jack Torrance starts to go nuts. Is it the spirits and the evil of this place kind of consuming him? Is it the cabin fever? Is it his alcoholism getting the best of him? You never really know if it's one of those things, all of those things, none of those things. But when they start to dive into the alcoholism spot, there's a scene in the movie where he goes into this vast open bar. Nobody's there. No alcohol is kept on premises. And he's sitting there, and he's just tired of everything. He's got his head in his hands, and he's like, I would sell my soul for just a glass of beer. And I love the way that the camera just kind of pans, and he's got his hands over his eyes, and then he just pulls him away, and he goes, "Hi, Lloyd."
Hi, Lloyd. A little slow tonight, isn't it?
Yes, it is, Mr. Torrance.
And then the bartender is there, and they just start to have this conversation, and the whole conversation just literally feels like, at least the way that I interpret it, it feels like the devil is patting him on the back, like, it's all right, man. Everybody goes through this. You should definitely kill your family. And it's just, you know, it's such a creepy scene, because he's telling him about how he hurt his son and he didn't mean to, and his wife won't let him forget it, and how he just wants to drink but she won't let him, and it's just this growing rage of people not letting him be who he is and not letting the alcoholism just be what he's about. And the whole time this bartender is just sitting there patting him on the back, and it that's kind of the turning point for the movie for me. What do you think of that scene?
Well, as soon as the movie started turning in that direction, both that one and then the scene in the bathroom, not too far after that, of just this eerie vibe of the temptation and the demons kind of tempting him to just go crazy, and just the way they're even played out and the way that he's acting in the insanity of it, just so unnerving was kind of the I guess the word that would come to my mind of how the interactions are playing, what he's saying, and the way it's doing this back and forth. Both of those ones just kind of is like companion pieces of eeriness and unnerving. Yeah, definitely kind of stuck out.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the scene that whenever I think of The Shining, for some reason, I always just think of that one scene. Hi, Lloyd. And any bartender, there's like an ongoing joke, any bartender that you don't know the name of when you walk up to him, you just call him Lloyd. And it's from this movie. So that's awesome. Well, my last positive, which is actually kind of a transition point, the thing that is kind of this movie's biggest strength in a way for some viewers, but also its biggest negative for others, and I'm thinking you might be on the latter side of that, is the ambiguity of some of the answers of this movie and some of the story of it. Like, there's so much in this movie that just does not have an answer. Like, what exactly is making him crazy? Of course, the final shot of the movie when it shows him in this, spoilers, people, this is all full spoilers, but whenever you get to the picture at the very last shot of the movie and it shows Jack Torrance back in like the 20s, and you're like, okay, was he reincarnated? Is he now like kind of consumed into this hotel and now he's just a piece of it? Is every single caretaker look like Jack Nicholson? You don't know. You don't know what caused the previous caretaker that he hears about the whole time, Grady, which whenever he's hearing the story, it's Charles Grady, but whenever he actually meets the spirit, it's Delbert Grady. So are there two Gradys? Are they the same person? Is there some kind of, weird dichotomy there that they're trying to hint at? There's so much ambiguity in this movie that on one hand, it makes you rack your brain about it, and it makes you try to come up with theories, come up with explanations. It keeps you thinking about it after the runtime is over with. I've seen this movie like 7 or 8 times. I still think about it like, I wonder if it's this, I wonder if it's this, I wonder if it's none of that. But at the same time, there's also a bit of frustration there whenever you go through the story and you're like, I have no idea what happened at the end of the day. So what's your thoughts on that side of it?
Yeah, and that's somewhat kind of we're on some of the negatives, but like you said, a positive of, if you watch a movie and the first thing you want to do is talk about it with someone and look things up and look up theories and read about it, and it certainly elicited the right feelings of terror and eeriness and creepiness, and there's ideas in there that make you go, what did that mean? What did this mean? And you want to look it all up. Those are all positives. At the same time, if that's what I guess, as a guy that tends to be more on the side of story, structure, arcs and things like that, that's where a lot of the things in the movie I'm like, okay, well, is this just kind of Kubrick is really good at making weird stuff that makes people go, what did he mean by that? And then therefore a bunch of people like, it's a masterpiece, it's brilliant, and it means he's a visionary, and it means this, and it could mean this. And there's a side to me that's just kind of contrarian towards anything that kind of lent in that direction. So certainly that's feeding some of my criticism of it. But the ambiguity kind of at the end was like, wait, what just happened here at the end? What's this picture mean? Where was this set up in any way at any point in time earlier? Or did we just kind of add this one more element into it? And so things like that tend to be pretty annoying for me.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I choose my kind of way that I've chosen just to kind of go along with it is that I believe he just kind of gets consumed into the hotel, and that was kind of the visual representation of that. But you never know. But yeah, it's one of those movies, and it's one of those debates that you'll have online, like especially in our kind of sphere, whenever you get actual comments and everything, where people like, if you criticize something like that, like, you just have to have stories spoon-fed to you. You have no imagination. And then there's the opposite end of that. It's like, no, I like ambiguity here and there. I like some questions, but I also like a little bit of finality too. So it's one of those weird gray areas. That's why it's kind of like a positive and a negative at the same time. But definitely kind of a transition point. Well, while we're talking about negatives, as far as acting, to me, the one acting performance in this that I've always kind of thought was a negative, and there's some scenes where it's not so bad, but especially towards the end, whenever she really has to be heightened up, I've never really been a big fan of the wife. I believe Mary Shelley is the actress, correct me if I'm wrong, but...
It's Shelley Duvall.
Shelley Duvall, that's right. Okay,
Mary
thank you.
Shelley
Duvall.
Someone else.
Something else. I got half of it right, Shelley. Anyway, Mrs. Torrance, we'll just say that. So Mrs. Torrance, whenever she's a normal mother, a normal wife, I think she's fine. But whenever she has to start really kind of evoking the sense of fear and evoking the sense of paranoia and everything like that, I just feel like it's really heavy. And whenever they actually like stop and put the camera on her and she's got the knife in one hand and she's like stuff like that, it just feels so over the top to me, and I can never quite stomach that side of her performance. So it's nothing that like makes the movie horrible to me, but I think especially stacked up next to Jack Nicholson, it's a definite negative for me.
I think maybe he should be taken to a doctor.
You think maybe he should be taken to a doctor? When do you think maybe he should be taken to a doctor?
As soon as possible. As soon as possible. Jack.
Yeah, it's a tough one because the nature of the movie, it's such a feels like a dreamlike state of weirdness kind of like an escalating sense of kind of odd dream state of over the topness, where I almost know, like, you don't even know how to evaluate acting in that sense, because everything is so over the top and escalated. But certainly it doesn't. Next to him, there's a reason that he's a legend, and she was, in Popeye the year after this or something like that.
Yeah.
And so you have to think about things like that. But so she definitely isn't on the same level as him, and frustrating at times.
So yeah, I definitely agree with all that. Now, the other aspect of this movie too, which it's kind of a little bit hammy in the way that it's executed. What do you think about the way that they execute the actual The Shining? Like the psychic powers of Danny Torrance in Scatman Crothers' character, where they're kind of communicating through their mind and, everything like that. Do you feel like that was executed well, or do you feel like it's a little bit off-putting somehow?
I can remember when I was a little boy, my grandmother and I could hold conversations entirely without ever opening our mouths. She called it shining. And for a long time, I thought it was just the two of us that had the shine to us. Just like you probably thought you was the only one.
Well, I thought just the way the movie plays out, it feels like an afterthought.
Yeah.
It's like this movie, you could, with like a weekend rewrite, remove The Shining from the whole thing, and it's just a story about a guy getting cabin fever and going crazy. And it doesn't, it's literally like a weekend rewrite of the script because of the way it seems like it's so minimalized. The actual way some of it plays out is a bit weird at times, and it always struck me as odd that there's this kid that has, The Shining shows up, and then, hey, look, the cook has it too. That's convenient. That always felt like a bit odd to me. And so, the whole, especially the fact that it's called The Shining, and then the way it's kind of handled feels like an afterthought. Like Stanley Kubrick was more interested in telling a story about a guy going crazy and alcoholism a little bit. It never really, like, it was like, what? This feels like this should be a lot more interesting and handled better than it is. This, especially given how meticulous and well crafted everything else is, then the thing that the movie's named after is just kind of like, oh yeah, there's The Shining's in here too.
Yeah, and I tend to agree. That's why I was actually asking your opinion first, because I was curious if I was alone in that. But it's something that, like you said, because the movie is called The Shining, I feel like that's one of the elements that makes Stephen King so critical of this adaptation, because it's kind of well known amongst movie fans. Stephen King hates this movie, and it's also one of the things that kind of makes people not take anything Stephen King says for serious when it comes to his movie adaptations, because they're like, this is the guy that thinks The Shining is bad. I'm not taking his word if he says this movie is good. So it's kind of funny, but it is one of those things that you feel like, I haven't read the novel personally, but I feel like if I read the novel, it's probably a much larger chunk of the story. And it does feel like there's aspects of that's missing from the movie a little bit, almost like it was thrown in out of obligation because the movie's called The Shining, so you have to address it. But some of the way that the acting comes across, like whenever he's kind of having fits and seizures, or like when Scatman Crothers has, slowly opens his eyes and his mouth, like, like stuff like that. Like you could easily make a parody of those scenes. So it doesn't really, they don't stand out as like, what the hell's going on? But when you look at it, you're kind of like, I don't know, that could have been done a little bit better. But go ahead.
Like the shots of the kid just like, like when it would just cut to his face and then cut to other weird images, I was like, oh, okay. I feel like this is the sort of thing that when you're Stanley Kubrick and it's become a classic, you can do this. But if you put out a movie now doing the same thing, I don't think people would let it slide. Like I watch a movie like this and like the opening credits roll up and they're in baby blue, and I was like, what? Well, that seems out of place. And so there are a number of things like that kind of always felt off to me. But as to like Stephen King and his take on it, so I read kind of the different Wikipedia articles on the differences, because I haven't read the book, but was curious, like, why is it that Stephen King is so critical of it? And if you read the differences, it makes a ton of sense why the author of the book would see this movie and go, that's not my book. That's like my book, but it's not like it. And it's, like you said, the Shining stuff. When the cook shows up, he doesn't die. Well, actually, some of the story things where I was like, that was very random. So they build up the cook showing up, and then he dies instantly. One of those infamous things that just kind of happens because it's so quick and random. The one guy that gets murdered in it is the guy that's supposed to be the hero. He doesn't die in the book. And then, it ends not with Jack running through the maze and just dying. Well, even that way that played out, that he's running, and then it just cuts to him frozen. Yeah, it just cuts to it. I was like, oh, I guess Stanley Kubrick can pull that off. I just don't know if someone did that today, people would be like, yeah, you can do that. Things like that. That's the stuff to me. But it very much was Stanley Kubrick made a Stanley Kubrick film out of Stephen King's work. And so that it minimalized the elements that Stephen King kind of really crafted in there that he really cared about. And so it makes sense to me that you'd like that he would be frustrated. And people that are just judging Stephen King over that have never created something, obviously, and watched someone else change it.
Yeah, no, and I tend to not put too many, I kind of take the Stephen King thing with a grain of salt because, like, just everything you said there, part of the thing with adapting a book is stuff's going to get left out.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's for good, sometimes it should have been included, you never know. People tend to agree that The Shining is an awesome movie, so I think that most people see it as, well, the movie's great, so whatever he left out must not have been needed. And whenever, like you said, if you're the creator of it, you definitely have an emotional attachment to that, and you're like, people see The Shining, but they're not reading my book, and they're missing the biggest part of the story. So there's aspects of that I definitely understand.
And that especially that what they're not seeing is the reason that it works is because it's Stanley Kubrick. Mm-hmm. And you're not talking about this one's better than this one. You're talking about this world famous writer and a world famous director that have two different visions of a story that the author came up with, and it's very much so. It only is this brilliant thing. When people talk about why it's so amazing, it's the visionary, it's the direction of it, it's the way he handled things, it's the performance he got out of someone. It's not because the reason it's better is because he turned down the amount of The Shining that's in it. It's because he changed the ending so the hotel doesn't blow up. No one mentions the story details as to why it's better. They mention the Stanley Kubrickisms as to why it's better, which, it's Stanley Kubrick, so he's going to make a brilliant, visionary Stanley Kubrick film out of it. And so that's, Kubrick fans are going to behave like Kubrick fans.
Red rum. 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 Stop it. Red rum. Red rum.
Absolutely. I tend to agree with that. It makes me want to read the novel, actually, just to kind of see a different side of it and see if it makes me appreciate the movie more or less. That'd be a really interesting kind of experiment there. But yeah, some of the scenes you were talking about, like, it's funny because, like, I watch it and I watch it through the eyes of knowing this is somewhat a product of its time and somewhat a product of the director. So when I see scenes like you're talking about where it's an iconic ending, but it is the way it's handled whenever you describe it or write it on paper is hilarious, where he's running through the snow and then literally it's a quick cut and all of a sudden he's frozen and you're just looking at him, and it's so comedic if you look at it through a certain light.
Yeah.
So stuff like
literally,
that.
As I was watching it last night, because I hadn't watched it in a little while, and I remember the ending being jarring, but it was after midnight. I was like 2 a.m. I was watching it, and then it just cuts to him sitting there, and I was like, wait, did I just fall asleep? Let me rewind that real quick. I literally thought I fell asleep.
Yep, exactly. So yeah, there's definitely some elements in there that I think it's going to be harder for people as time goes on to visit this movie for the first time, like in 2020, 2040, and accept those things, because it's easy when you're a film fan at our age that kind of some of your favorite movies are from that era, the 70s, the 80s, and you can pass on certain things because they're products of the time. But I feel like as the movie ages, as the time goes on, some of those things are going to stick out so much more to people. Like, I know whenever my son's old enough to watch it, I'm going to show him, and I guarantee scenes like that, it's going to be like, what the heck? Like, stuff like that. So it's gonna be funny. But that's pretty much, honestly.
Actually, to throw this one kind of back at you. So, like, literally when the cook guy dies, and then the way Jack just He's sitting down in the snow. Like, that always bothered me, the anticlimactic nature of the things that it's building up towards. And that's the Kubrickisms. Does that stuff bother you? Or is that like, oh yeah, that's the brilliance of it is that it plays against your expectations?
I mean, it never bothers me necessarily. It definitely, there should be more of a punishment, I feel like, for Jack Torrance with everything that he goes on with. But at the same time, I just feel like that was kind of, like you said, he didn't want to blow up the hotel. And I think the only reason Scatman Crothers dies is because in a movie that's this long and gets this grim that you have to, he wanted to show somebody dying. Yeah. And he didn't want to kill one of the family members. So I think he kind of wrote that in there. Okay, well, make sure the cook comes back at some point and gets an axe in the chest. So it does feel like some of those things were changes for the sake of change or for the visual of it. But it's never necessarily bothered me just because I've kind of, some of those things, I think there's some aspects of The Shining when you watch it, you kind of know about it going in. I know that at some point he's going to freeze. I know at some point he's going to kill somebody with an axe, the iconic scene when he chops through the door. Here's Johnny. You know a lot of those things the same way you know that Darth Vader is, Luke Skywalker's father when you watch Empire Strikes.
Wait, who is Luke Skywalker's father?
I mean, there's this guy. So there's certain elements in pop culture that I feel like you just walk into a movie knowing vicariously and you have no idea why. So I think that aspect of this movie never bothered me just because I always kind of expected it.
Yeah. Well, and I think if that's kind of if I were to kind of capture probably why this doesn't resonate with me the way other movie or it does with others, is it all kind of goes back to my nature. It can resonate much more with story structures, dramatic tension, character arcs, and kind of the payoff of the dramatic tensions being built into it. And so then when hero guy shows up to save the day, randomly he's dead. And then likewise, bad guy is just running through the maze. He just sat down out in the cold. It's those types of things that for Kubrick's not making the movie that he's not using the scorecard that I'm judging him based off of.
Gotcha.
And in which case, if you're judging it based off of, he's making this master art piece of evoking emotion and exploring ideas and ambiguity, then based on that, you score it one way. If you score it based off of, traditional, I've read Sid Field's Guide to Screenwriting, he does not do what you're supposed to do in movies.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it depends on how you look at the movie. If you're looking at it based off of the general, kind of movie making techniques and the movie making path, if you will, there are some things that are awkward. For me, I think a lot of the biggest positives, the reason why I always kind of have a lot of praise for this movie is just because it's more of an experience for me than it is kind of a story. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's one of those movies, kind of like Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I was really kind of honing in on the experience whenever I reviewed that film. This is kind of the same way. It's kind of about the palpable tension and this journey you go on and how the movie makes you feel. And, it's a totally different type of movie than just your standard storytelling on a video format. So it depends how you look at it. Absolutely. If you look at it one way, it's a masterpiece. If you look at it other way, it's kind of overrated. So I definitely don't fault you for some of the things that that you find negative that don't bother me so much, just the same way as I can totally acknowledge why, if you look at it from a certain light, some of the things are a little bit weird and hokey. So it's definitely an interesting movie to review, interesting movie to tell people to watch and get their reactions for it, and very interesting movie to continuously revisit throughout the years and see how it ages. Yes. So what's your rating, your review score for this movie, if you were to give one?
Oh, man. That is I don't even know how to rate it. I've been thinking about it, for the last 15 hours or so.
You want me to give mine first?
Yeah, if you can go first, and then while you're doing that, I'll think about it.
Okay, so I definitely think this is a classic. I think that it is a very important movie. I think it's got in my opinion, it's got the best Jack Nicholson performance ever. I've never been the biggest fan of the Tim Burton Batman, so that one kind of being pushed out of the argument. I think this is clearly the Jack Nicholson that I always think of whenever somebody mentions Jack Nicholson. I think that some of the emotions this movie evokes in you is unlike most movies. The tension, the fear, the different elements of the story, how it all kind of comes together and affects Jack Nicholson while you're kind of seeing it all unfold. All of that stuff is great. I love revisiting it. There are some bad acting in there, from from Mrs. Torrance and from, you know, Scatman Crothers to a degree. Some scenes here and there it's hokey. The Shining could have been done a little bit better, could have been a bigger part of the story. And some of the Kubrick-isms, I'm going to steal your line, they definitely only work if it's got Stanley Kubrick's name on the top. So I totally agree with all that. Not my favorite movie of all time, not my favorite horror movie of all time, but definitely one of those movies that I think is very important, and I do appreciate the hell out of it. So I'm going to say to go out and buy it, and I'm going to give it just a solid 4 out of 5.
Okay. For me, I'd probably land essentially saying some of the exact same things as you, just with a more of a cynical bent to it. I think my rating would be either a 3.5 or a 4 out of 5, somewhere right in that exact same ball range. So let's just put me one notch below what you're saying. Because I admire it just as much as you do. I would tell anyone, you absolutely have to see this movie. If you love movies, this is a movie you have to see. If you're a horror fan, why haven't you seen this already? I'd agree with everything you just said. We just might be saying it from the different angles of it. But so absolutely, I'd probably land right around that same spot as you.
Awesome. Cool. Well, we can all come from different perspectives and still agree. That's awesome. So, gotta love that. So, basically, to wrap up our thoughts, guys, The Shining, you should see it if you haven't seen it. If you haven't seen it, why are you watching this review? You just got the movie just got spoiled all to hell for you. But you should still check it out. It's a really good movie. So that's basically what we think, guys. What are your thoughts on The Shining? Put them down below, and definitely go out and check Sean Chandler Talks About out over on YouTube. A link to his channel will be down in the description. And like I said, we're also going to be reviewing Stephen King's The Mist on his channel. It is available right now. Sean, tell us where we can find The Mist.
You can find my channel. It's Sean Chandler Talks About on YouTube, and I've got movie reviews, ranking videos over there. You can find me on Twitter at Kirk Never Died, and also on Facebook at Sean Chandler Talks About.
Awesome. So yes, go over to Sean Chandler Talks About, hit the like and the subscribe button, comment on his videos, tell him Cody sent you, or this video sent you, or whatever you want to say. Just be nice about it, or at least be entertaining with your trolling. It's always fun. So do whatever you guys want. Check out The Shining. Put your thoughts down on The Shining below. What's your favorite Stephen King adaptation? Are you excited for it? Put all of that down there. And if you want to check out some more of our videos, you can check out a few by clicking right over here.